I'm Evil Twin Skippy, and you once again join me on my channel on world building, game design, making in general. Today we're going to be adding a third dimension of emotion to our color wheel based emotional system. We're building on the work of Posner, Russell, and Peterson to be able to plot emotion on a 2D plane. I'll get to that in a minute. And we're going to be adding some elements of the Big Five and Hexago models to our chromodynamic model of emotion here. I was turned on to this topic by a YouTube by Spencer Greenberg and his associates, and they had put together a massive study on looking at Jungian archetypes and the Enneagram, and he compared them to this Big Five model that a lot of psychologists use. And the Big Five came out on top, mostly because it grades on a curve. The other models put you in a box, and then, at least in the case of the Enneagram, they explain why you might shift your box, whereas Big Five, nobody is totally one thing or another. They're a blend of all of the above. It's a great video. It's worth watching. I am not doing it justice in this summary. All right, so let's review, so you don't have to go rewatch my entire other video. The circumplex model states that emotion can be kind of represented like a radar scope. Each emotion has like a direction to it, and even an intensity to it. We can see that different emotions that seem to be related are lumped together, and sometimes those lumps look a little strange, which in my prior talk we explained, because we're using a color wheel, that perhaps these are different lightness or darkness tones of the same core emotion. So depressed is the darker form of gloomy, and gloomy is the darker form of sad. When I was watching the talk on the Big Five, I realized that maybe we just need a whole axis to describe what's going on here. So before we had valence and arousal, and now we're going to add a third axis called regulation. So valence is how pleasant or unpleasant that emotion is to experience. Arousal is how activated or deactivated you are in response to that emotion to do something about it. What I'm going to say is that regulation is how orderly or disruptive that action you take is driven to be. Now, I'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. So let's start with our plot here, and this is from the original paper. So I've taken that and I've added this fictional third dimension to our emotions. So I've kind of given each of the emotions, not subjective, and I'm not an expert here, but the idea of how orderly or disorderly that emotion drives somebody to be. So here we are in 2 dimensions, and you can see that it looks just like our other graph. But if we turn it ever so slightly, we can see that there is a lot of difference between things that were previously all lumped together. Now, if I turn the model on its side here, we can really see some of these stark contrasts. So we're looking at it edge on, as if that the slice of paper that represented our grid in the middle is in fact that line through the center of the screen. Here we can see that annoyed and distressed, that were kind of on the same part of the chart, there's a bit of difference between them now when we've added this regulation component. And then we can also see with angry and afraid, now they are radically different despite being on top of each other in the other plot. I'm viewing afraid as experiencing anger, but in a way that freezes you into inaction. And angry, of course, is the feeling of distress that causes you to want to turn over tables and yell and do whatever it takes to get out of the situation. So, how does this impact our temperament system? Well, we do have our color wheel, and each of the personalities is on the color wheel. And we did tie each of the each of the archetypes into a core emotion. And then the Enneagram does the same thing. But what we're doing now is we're going to take our idea that each of these primary colors represents we call it an approach, a strategy, how one goes about solving a problem or dealing with an issue. We're borrowing the ones from Fate Accelerated. That's forceful, quick, careful, sneaky, clever, and charm. I have a full explanation in another video. But what we're going to do now is just think of those just like we did with emotion, and think of them as just being directions on a two-dimensional plane. And now, with our regulation, we're going to add two new approaches, pure and corrupt. Or order and chaos, but this gives us a whole new way of looking at archetypes. So we could have regulated variations of our archetypes where somebody is more orderly, regardless of what direction they would normally take. They just operate in a more orderly fashion. And these people would be more reserved, more long-term thinking, more considerate of how their actions are going to impact others or the universe, with the downside being that they're a bit more inflexible than most. We'll also have reactive variations of each of these personalities, and they're going to be more adventurous and spontaneous. They're going to be more expedient in how they solve problems, and they're going to suffer as a result from low impulse control. We also have kind of our literary logical extremes of the paragon and the villain. The paragon being pure order and the villain being pure chaos. And the paragon is utterly selfless, ultra long-term in thinking, and they consider how they impact the universe at large. But the shadow of a paragon is that they're paralyzed by an inability to act, because anything they do is going to change something somewhere. And our villain is reckless, immediate goal-taking. They only care about what impacts them. But their shadow is that this behavior is ultimately self-defeating, because it's never consistent, and eventually people get tired of it. We have a third extreme, which is a lack of extreme. I would call them the gray. This is literally where people meet you in the middle. These are people that don't have a pronounced archetype or approach. They bounce around the middle. And they're very flexible, and they're balanced, and between whether they're planning or improvising, and they're quite polite, but they're also inconsistent, shallow, and generally useless as far as magic is concerned. So think of our archetypes not as bins, but as extremes of a temperament, and that most people fall on a shade that is not way out on the vivid scale. They're closer to gray than they are to the pure hue. And in our particular case, we're modeling not real people but characters. And when real people play characters, they alter their appearance and their mannerisms, and they're overly consistent with the character they present. And we even go so far as to wear makeup to highlight certain features or hide others. Storybook characters are way too consistent to be believed. Their virtues are virtues throughout. Their flaws they will carry to the grave, literally. They're completely unrealistic about how they react or don't react to things. Heroes, persevere when other people would fail, and villains, even the slightest thing could be their sob story for why they are the most evilest thing in the world. But we need that first story. It would be really disruptive for somebody to be like that in real life, but it would also be entirely boring to read about in a story. And let's face it, story people are not real people. Their good days and their bad days are driven completely by the plot. Their backstory is entirely too consistent, and their inability to deal with trauma is so bad that we have to put them through character arcs to deal with it by hand. Uh, Narrators only have a limited bandwidth to communicate what these people are, what makes them tick, what they like, what they don't like. You can't spend 80 pages describing a character, nor can you spend 30 minutes of screen time describing a character. You've got a few minutes to get the audience's attention, and you only explain as much as you need to get them to buy into the character. And let's face it, characters also they don't take bathroom breaks, they don't have periods, they don't sleep unless the plot calls for it. Remember, we're writing fiction, and fiction's job is to be truer than reality, in the sense that we're telling a story. So, this third dimension, why am I bothering? In my twisted brain, this allows us to integrate a lot of what was learned from the Big Five and the Hexago models. They don't put people in bins. They just give you scores on openness or conscientiousness or extroversion or agreeableness or neuroticism, and you can be all five or none of them all at once. Your personality is just the combining of all of those numbers into, basically five stats. Hexago breaks neuroticism up into emotionality and honesty. But we're going to see that that's not a real big, heavy lift to get past. Like I said, they all agree that openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, and agreeableness are a factor. And we can actually, if we squint hard enough, kind of shape them into the dimensions we already have. So think of extroversion in its extreme as our charm, and conscientiousness as our new axis of purity, and openness as quick versus clever. And even neuroticism kind of falls under what we would have as either sneaky or forceful, because either extreme is somebody who's behaving irrationally. And then agreeableness is our gray in the middle, because, we even have the idiom for it, meeting people in the middle. To do Hexago, all we do is we just treat emotionality as one direction of the forceful, sneaky axis, and honesty is the other. And, to be truthful is to be direct, and most forceful people are perfectly blunt about what they're doing and why, and most sneaky people are tend to be a bit of a right brain thinker as far as dealing with emotion and aspersion, as opposed to just coming out and saying what they're trying to say. Now, is this chromodynamic model of mine right? Well, all models are wrong, but some might be useful. Now, these archetypes we're building, we're kind of tying back to emotional states and just simply saying that different approaches are kind of different ways that we deal with different emotional states. And just personality is a pattern of doing the same thing or having a preference. We, in our other talk, describe how powerful emotional states can actually shift which archetype we work from. But that's mainly based off of stealing the best parts of the Enneagram. I have a whole talk on that. It's worth it if you're not familiar with it. I don't have the latest regulation information here on the third dimension of personality, but if you want to go back and check my math on mapping chromodynamic color to valence and arousal, I have all my formulas and plots up here on my blog. So my perennial upcoming topics list was going to be a 3-minute guide for each of the archetypes and showing you guys how to use my tarot deck. But I'm now up to 18 personality archetypes when you factor in the orderly and disorderly state, and it's just kind of spiraling. I'm not sure how entertaining that would be, so I'm putting that on the back burner. And I'm going to put aside showing you the deck specifically, and instead I plan on rolling out an entire tabletop system which uses the deck as a mechanic. So I'll be developing that. You can still buy the deck, and it's still fun to use. It's got a little guide to it already on how to use it inside the GM emulator, and even for games like Ironsworn. So what we will be talking about is using chromodynamics inside of a text adventure game. I created a copy of my Sublight universe as a parody within a parody, which I will call the Expense RPG, because I'm making fun of the Expanse. And I'm going to be putting an entry this year into the interactive fiction competition. I mean, right now it's completely primitive, but I've got a month and I think I could pump something out. But the idea is that I'm going to be using chromodynamics to model the reaction to the player's action of all the characters. And I'm just going to see if I can make that work. I have a JavaScript framework that when it's all done, I'll probably post it to GitHub or Fossil. And it'll be fun. Well, thanks so much for staying with me this far, and I will catch you in the next talk.